As you find your seats again, I invite you to turn in the Pew Bibles, which you can find in front of you. First, to Paul's letter to the Romans. This passage can be found on page 923. Romans chapter 13, verses 11 and 12. Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. And next, from the Gospel of John on page 862, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They were in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." This is the word of the Lord.
Much to all of our relief this week, the president declared victory over the war on Christmas. The war on Thanksgiving is still raging, apparently, but the battle over Christmas was a decisive win. We can enjoy this year's festivities without fear of the radical left or secular liberals stealing our Christmas cheer. But there's another war that's never even been acknowledged, and that's the war on Advent. And that war isn't being fought by secular liberals or the radical left that are the culprits behind the watering down of the season. That culprit is Christians. That's right. Christians have been waging a war on Advent for decades now, maybe centuries. No telling how long this has been going on. And it's hard to see because the weapon we've been using to fight this war on Advent is Christmas, with all of its feel-good accoutrements. Cute children's Christmas pageants on the second Sunday of December. Second Sunday? Churches holding Christmas carol sing-alongs with the old little town of Bethlehem and Silent Night and all that, sung by candlelight on the third week of December. Beautiful Christmas decorations going up all over the place as soon as Thanksgiving is over or even before. People saying Merry Christmas when you're buying your gifts in the store all month long. You don't know if it's going to be merry yet or not. Herod could kill the kid. He could be born stillborn. The Holy Family could get detained at the border of Egypt. You don't know. On December 23rd, you have no idea if the whole thing is going to go haywire. You just don't know. But that's what's been going on, folks. I needed to tell you. And it's not looking good for salvaging Advent from the hands of well-meaning Christians. It's hard when you're up against the feel-good glamour of Christmas. Because if we're really honest with ourselves, the season of Advent, that very short 4-week period in the Christian liturgical year, we'd have to admit that it absolutely terrifies us. And for a full 4 weeks, we should be shaking in our boots, wondering what is going to happen with all of this Emmanuel, God with us, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, the divine drawing near stuff, because that is not a normal way of talking. That's not business as usual. That is apocalyptic fantasy. Advent is really the most apocalyptic season of the entire church year. It's the season when the lectionary gives us texts like these to read. Besides this, you know what time it is, how it is now the moment for you to wake from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us now than it was when we became believers. The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Or the Gospel of Matthew's text for today, which we didn't read because I'm doing something else with the Gospel of John. But squeeze in another text here. This is what you would have heard if we read Matthew 24. About that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days, before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. What can we compare to the coming of the divine into the world? The flood of Noah that wipes away almost the entirety of Earth's inhabitants? Two people working in a field side by side, one suddenly and surprisingly gone with no explanation whatsoever? That is what Advent is to us. I'd like to see some children put on a play like that someday. Oh no, what happened to Johnny? And everybody shrugs, and then they shuffle out to their car and go home and hope Christmas comes. That'd be an Advent pageant. Maybe some churches could get together on the third week of December and sing some songs of apocalypse and dread. I'd be there. When you're buying your family's Christmas presents all December long, the clerk at the checkout counter says, "Be ready for the unexpected hour," as they pack up your gifts. That'd be appropriate. This is why during the month of December, during all 4 weeks of Advent, the color on the altar, my stole, and the candles, the color is purple. We don't make these colorful changes in the sanctuary based on our aesthetic preferences. These are symbols. And they mean something when you see them. And purple is a symbol of penitence, contrition, mournful sorrow over sin. When you walk into the sacred space and see purple on the altar and draped around the minister's neck and all that, it means get on your knees and start repenting. This is serious. I don't even think the president is going to be able to salvage this one. It's most likely a total loss. Advent is pretty well doomed for us. And it's only partially a joke. Because Advent really is scary if you let it sink in a bit. It's not just the apocalyptic text from the Bible or the gravity of just what God's coming presence among us might mean. All that is foreboding enough, but it's also the central Christian theological teaching that Advent inaugurates in our midst every year. Incarnation. Sounds innocent enough. For the 3 Sundays that I'm preaching through the Advent and Christmas season, today, December 15th and December 29th, we're going to look carefully at this notion of the divine taking on human flesh and ask what it suggests to us about how we practice our faith and how we go about doing our ministry as a congregation and how we deliberate over ethical decisions that we have to make. Because that notion, incarnation, is the crux of why Advent is so unsettling. God desires to be a body. In arche en hologos, kai hologos, en proston theon, kai theos en hologos. That's not tongues, it's just Greek. But it is that opening phrase of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, the translation word is a bit deceptive here. In Greek, logos means much more than just the spoken or the printed word. It also has connotations of reason, or plan, or the ordering of the cosmos. In the beginning was the ordering of the cosmos. And the ordering of the cosmos was with God and was God. It's where we get all of our L-O-G-Y suffixes, biology, theology, anthropology, all of that from the word logos. And then the logos becomes sarx, flesh, and dwells among us. And the ordering principles of the cosmos become flesh and live in our midst. And later, John continues, no one has ever seen God. It is the logos become sarx, the word becoming flesh and dwelling among us, who has made God known to us. And I know you've heard these phrases over and over again, and we read them all the time. The prologue to John is one of the most famous passages of the New Testament. But hear it within the constellation of all of the symbols that set you up to hear it differently at Advent. Another year on the Christian worship calendar has ended. You enter the sacred space for the first Sunday of the new year to see that the color is purple, the color of penitence and contrition and mournful sorrow over sin. A new year begins, but not with a celebratory flourish, but with a fragile, anticipatory hope and apocalyptic dread. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. No one has ever seen God, but it is the divine becoming flesh and dwelling among us who has made God known. An incarnational faith. Living life in the light of the Logos becoming sarx and dwelling among us is jarring, is disturbing, is terrifying even. It subverts most of what we think we know about the divine and about ourselves. Think of the challenges this notion of incarnation poses to so many of our assumptions that guide our everyday lives. Let's go back a little bit. From Platonist philosophy, we came to imagine God as completely transcendent from the world, and likewise, that our minds were far greater than our flesh. The mind needed to exert control over the flesh. That crops up in Christian theology through the centuries. And it's no mistake that over time, the mind, rationality, was ascribed to men as a masculine quality, while the flesh, the body, became a feminized notion. The mind needs to exert rational control over the unruly flesh. Takes on a violent gender dynamic. And then, when we're sure we know our own uniqueness in the world as humans, exceptional in the eyes of God, we can escape the material bonds that shackle us to the world and touch the transcendence of the divine and become masters over the stupid materiality of the earth. And one day, escape our bodies to become more like God, or so we think. And then on a day like today, World AIDS Day, we must face all of the ways that bodies have been neglected and marginalized and discounted because of the particularity of the flesh they inhabit. A gay friend of mine recently shared an experience saying, one thing that we spent a few weeks talking about in a gay men's support group I used to attend was the shared trauma around HIV/AIDS for those of us who lived through being LGBTQIA in the 80s. It's not something that gets talked about much, but that shared experience of losing a lot of our community and hearing legislators openly talk about quarantining us left scars on our psyches. And our white, heteropatriarchal minds' rational control over the body, over women's bodies and over queer bodies and over foreign bodies and over bodies of color runs rampant even still. In war zones, in refugee camps, in U.S. courtrooms and prisons, at the border, who gets in and who gets kept out, who gets locked up, who gets treatment, who gets aid, and who gets quarantined. And then the message of incarnation. God desires to be a body. Dashes our plans for escape from materiality and rational control over nature as if we were special. You, all of you, John says, have never seen God. It is only the divine Logos becoming flesh by which you have come to understand what is holy. And the message of the Advent season that God is drawing near, that God is with us, revealed in us, is good news to be sure. But, you see, somehow in the Christian imagination over the centuries, God moved from the transcendent heights of heaven directly into the human heart and bypassed the body altogether. How did we get there? And that's what is at stake in the metaphorical war over Advent. Our desire, subconscious as it may be, to avert our gaze from the centrality of the body in the Christian narrative, because it threatens a whole world order of domination if God can only be understood in flesh. Myra Rivera, who teaches at Harvard Divinity School, says that in light of the Incarnation, quote, it is the obscurities of the world that point to God. Entering into that life means acknowledging that our complete being is caught up in that very world. All our knowledge of the world is embodied knowledge, and it is necessarily entangled in the world of which it is a part. There would be no knowledge without bodies, and no bodies without their constitutive relations to the world. So, let me invite you into a prayerful practice this Advent season. It's only 4 weeks, so if you hate it, it's just 4 weeks. So try it. Try it for 4 weeks. It's just a brief experiment. For these next 4 weeks, until December 25th, when you pray, I want to invite you to try to break yourself from the habit of closing your eyes and trying to pray a prayer to a faraway God who hears you from the heavens. And equally, I I want to invite you to try to break the imaginative hold that a God who resides in your metaphorical heart has on your prayerful practice. And this Advent, when you pray, I invite you to pray in the presence of a God who desired a body. Pray to the Logos who was with God in the beginning, through whom all things came into being, without whom not one thing came into being, who became flesh and lived among us. Pray with your ears, listening to the sound of bodies, human and more than human, vibrating with sound around you. Pray with your eyes, looking at the bodies of others around you, holding those bodies as sacred vessels of the divine. And, perhaps more difficult, look at your own body with loving care, with all of its particularities and peculiarities that you try so hard to ignore. Pray with your body, moving it in new ways to experience and express the divine presence in and around you, touching the material world around you with reverence, touching partners and loved ones in intimacy that is a prayer. And listen. Listen for the voice of the divine speaking in flesh, knowing that there would be no knowledge without bodies. No experience of the divine Logos, the ordering principles of the cosmos, without the appearance of holy sarx, flesh. Because if we take Advent serious, in the words of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the Incarnation changes everything.